Have you ever found yourself thinking like, this is my favorite author, and if I could control what they wrote, like this is the story I would want them to tell? That's what I'm gonna talk about in this video, along with like 12 other things because I don't really have a plan. And the fun thing about me is either my videos are aggressively planned for like months, or they're not planned at all and I just turn on the camera and I start talking and I talk about like nothing, and then I go off on tangents and I talk about things that don't matter. I want to talk about favorite authors, and I feel like this video could make you think that I'm talking about my favorite authors, like my auto-buy authors, because that's a video that gets posted a lot by people and has been requested of me a lot of times. And I feel like when other people get asked their favorite author, they have an easy answer. They have a go-to answer, and most of the time it's like an emotional response. It's like, this author has made me feel so many things. Like, this author has created my favorite something. They made me cry, they made me laugh, they made me whatever. But when I think of favorite author, my mind goes analytical, because I'm me. Hi, I'm Kayla. I haven't said hi. Welcome back to my channel. And I think of like the mathematical response to the question and what authors I have given the most 5 stars to. I've said before that I just can't consider an author a favorite until I've read 3 5 stars from them. That's just something that I invented. I made it up one day. I can't go back on it now. So what I thought I would do is pull all of those authors who've hit that thing in my life. There's 10 of them. And I don't actually look at those authors and think that they're favorites. I'm not like happy with this favorites list. This isn't like an author recommendation video, which is what I feel like these types of videos usually are. I'm just here to have an overarching discussion about the idea of favorite authors. I want to ask you a lot of questions, and I want to talk about what my favorite authors are doing, like what they're coming out with next, what I wish they would write in a perfect world, and also some authors who haven't hit that 3-book 5-star goal, but I think could one day, and that I have on my list of authors that I think I could call a favorite in the near future. So this can also cover like my progression as a reader, because let's talk about my first author, which is Elizabeth Acevedo. 3 of her books, all of them have been 5 stars. She came out with 3 YA books 3 years in a row. I think they're so good. I recommend them to tons of people. The thing about Elizabeth Acevedo is it's not even her stories or her characters, it's just her writing. Her writing really appeals to me. And so as somebody who is consistently every year reading more adult books than young adult now, I just naturally feel about so many of my favorite YA authors. The majority of favorite authors for me at this point are YA, or maybe it's like a half and half looking at them. But so my instinct is to look at them and think, I want them to continue to write what I'm interested in as I age. But that's not a fair thing to put onto people. But this is one of those authors that I think of and I want her to write something adult. She writes such interesting family dynamics that what I want in a dream world from Elizabeth Acevedo is an adult, like multi-generational story. I don't know if I would want it to be different timelines. Yeah, maybe I would want it to be different timelines. We're following like 3 different characters in different parts of history, and like they're all kind of going through similar things but differently because they are in different generations. I don't know what I would want the actual story to be, but I think that in my dream world is something that I would want from her. I think right now she's doing a lot of stuff for the younger generation, which is super cool. And obviously every author should write whatever they want to write. I can't actually control what people write, nor should I. I'm just gonna check her Goodreads to see if, okay, there's an Untitled thing that says for 2023, and it says multi-generational story of one Dominican American family through the lives of its women as they await the wake of one of the family's matriarchs. Okay, now I'm starting to think that it's not on my want to read list, but maybe I must have already knew that was a thing. I thought I was just making up something that I wanted from her, but that's too much of a coincidence. Okay, this one does seem to take place like all of the women at the same time in the same timeline. And it doesn't say if it's young adult or adult, but if it's adult, that's extremely exciting to me. I think she writes for this age audience really, really well. And so it's like selfish of me to think I want her to write an adult story. At this point, she is an auto-buy author for me. If she came out with another young adult, I do think I would pick it up just because I love her writing so much. There we go. First author down. Next author is Casey West, who I apparently didn't grab other books 4. Okay, so this is an author who I've given exactly 3 5-stars to, but I've also given so many 3 stars to, because this is an author I have read like some of the most books from. I feel like I've read 12 things from her or something around that. And my first kind of question to you is, when you think of your favorite author, is it somebody who you have enjoyed all of their books? Like, what happens when you read an author and you give out, you know, 5 stars, and then their next 5 books are all 2 stars or 3 stars? Do you still consider them a favorite, or do you remove them from this like imaginary list? Or maybe most people don't have that list and they really don't care. Casey West is an author that I enjoy a lot, but outside of this like factual has gotten 3 5-stars, I would never consider Casey West a favorite author, because I don't think of YA contemporary romance as a favorite genre. I guess that's my next question. Like, if you read solely, you know, high fantasy books, and then one day you pick up a nonfiction and it's the best nonfiction you've ever read, do you now consider that a favorite author even though you've never read another nonfiction in your life? Or do you just think of that book as a favorite book? What makes a favorite author a favorite author? So for me, Casey West has hit that status, but I don't consider her an auto buy, because there's quite a few books that I'm just not really interested in at this point. I don't really get excited about her new releases, but I occasionally will pick them up. There's a road trip one she has coming out this year that I probably won't pick up. I've DNF'd a couple of her recent books, and then I still have one called Sunkiss sitting on my TBR shelf that like I want to pick up, but I feel no motivation because I just don't see this genre as something that's going to be an all-time favorite moving forward. So sometimes for me, even if an author is a favorite author, I find it hard to pick up a book just because even if I enjoy it, I know it's not going to be a new all-time favorite at this point in my life. And if you're thinking like that's just a YA thing, it's also true with another author, which is Stephen King. Stephen King, I think, is the author that I have the most 5 stars for. But the thing about Stephen King is I do not get excited about his new releases. I still end up picking them up a lot of the time. Sometimes I buy them for my mom and then I end up reading them after. But more often than not, I end up picking them up for videos. Like I'm reading the Goodreads list of best thrillers or best horror of the year. And the thing about Stephen King is his books are almost always a 4-star for me current day, but I have so many 5 stars in the past that I have to think of him as a favorite. And his books are good, but I never get excited to pick up a book from him. But then it always ends up being a good book by the end, but not a new favorite. This is another author that I've read the most from, like probably 30 to 40 books. And as far as what I'm interested in Stephen King writing in the future, I didn't answer for Casey West because I think that she's actually in her perfect genre. I can't really imagine her writing adult, and if she wrote adult romance, like I'm probably not going to read it anyway. So I do think she's like in the right place. And Stephen King, obviously, like me controlling what Stephen King writes, that's not a thing. I can't even fathom any idea that he has yet to write that I think he would just be perfect for. What I do want from him is another like super fantastical experience. This is probably one of his only new releases that I actually feel anticipation for. It's called, I think, Fairy Tale or Fairy Tales, and it's a portal fantasy. I love portal fantasy. But let's move on to another Stephen, which is Stephen Graham Jones. With the other authors I've talked about, I have already read all of the things that they've written that I have been interested in. But with Stephen Graham Jones, he has such an extensive backlist that I can't imagine what he could come up with in the future, because I still need to go back and see what he's even written in the past. I think there's quite a few things I'm not interested in. He seems to have a lot of like short zombie fiction, but there are a couple things that I do want to pick up. My favorites from him have been My Heart is a Chainsaw and The Only Good Indians, and then Night of the Mannequins, Mapping the Interior. They've all been 4.5 and 5 stars. The hard thing for me to get on board with is series a lot of the time when I feel like a book is so good as a standalone. Like I didn't want a sequel to My Heart is a Chainsaw, but I obviously am going to pick up the sequel. Next up, we can talk about Angie Thomas, who I have given 3 5-stars to. Don't know where I put Concrete Rose, but it's somewhere around here. We've got The Hate You Give and On the Come Up. For me with Angie Thomas, it is her characters. They really stand out to me. They're all super memorable, very distinct, and have super strong personalities and passions, and that's what I love. It's not easy for me to think what I would want her to write because I don't know if I see her writing adult fiction. I actually would be interested to see her writing some middle grade, but let's see if she has anything on her Goodreads coming up. I know she's hard at work right now doing an adaptation, so I wonder if, like, would we be interested in another book in this kind of series where we hear from Star later in life? Or Star's children, if she had them? Or go a generation back? Right now, Angie Thomas is an auto-buy for me. But let's move on to an author who is not an auto-buy for me. And it feels very strange referring to Maggie Stiefvater as a favorite author. She wrote my favorite series of all time, but I don't like her other books. I'm not even particularly interested in many of her other books. And when I think of like Maggie Stiefvater writing things in the future, I can't imagine there's anything that I would pick up from her, especially if she remains in YA, which I think is where she thrives. The Raven Cycle is just like one of my all-time favorite things. But the thing about this series is I would never pick up something pitched like that like now. It's more of a nostalgic thing, even though it wasn't that long ago I read it. I didn't love the last book in the series, and the spin-off series like isn't my favorite, but I'm excited for the final book called Grey Warren. Like, thankfully we got a good title for that last one. I'm excited for the series to wrap up, to get some finality, and to also feel like this closure to my reading of Maggie Stiefvater, which seems so weird because this is a video about favorite authors, but I'm talking about how I don't want to read from my favorite authors. And that's what I mean when I say I don't really know like what this video is intended to be or feel. I think going back to my stupid rule about having to have 3 5-stars to be considered a favorite, I don't think it can be in the same series. I don't think I can only read 3 books from a series and then call that person a favorite author. That just doesn't feel right to me. So let's move on to Shannon Mcguire, who, if I had just read these 3 books in this Every Heart a Doorway series, I don't think I could call her a favorite. But then when Middle Game happened, a life-changing book for my reading, this is when I was like, oh, this is a favorite book and a favorite author. And because I have other evidence, even though it's all in one series, that I love this author, like this is the one that solidified it for me. And it's funny because Shannon Mcguire writes so many books, so much stuff, and spans so many ideas, and I'm not interested in 80% of her books. But then there's this part of me that's like, should I pick up these books that don't sound interesting at all to me because I know of her as a favorite author? But then I did pick up like a Mira Grant, one of her other author names, and didn't like that one. So who knows? So my next question is, how much of an author's backlist do you feel like you need to have read to consider them a favorite? Because if you asked me my favorite author right now, and I did have an emotional response instead of an analytical one, Shannon Mcguire would be in my top 5. But if I had read everything from her, including things I wasn't interested in, then would I not want to consider her a favorite? Just because percentage-wise it feels wrong? You're all gonna tell me I'm thinking too much about this, and you're absolutely right, and none of this matters. Let's keep that in mind. What I want from Shannon Mcguire is, she writes so many other things, and I'm so happy for her, and she can just keep doing all of that. I do want this to have another like 10 books in it. I'm happy to read this series for another 10 years. What I do want from this series though is I want some more twists. I want there to be reveals. I want there to feel like she set something up in book 2 that in book 12 we find out meant more. Or we read an entire book that's from a character's perspective and then we find out that like we already know that character. I'm just thinking like, what if one day we get Eleanor's book, but we don't know that it's Eleanor until the end? Like, that would just be such an epic experience. The whole series, she has said, is going to end with Cade, whose story is the one I'm most interested in, and I really respect that she's going to take her time and wait until she's ready to fully make that book what it needs to be. But as far as other books in this series, I did read most recently, the most recent release, Where the Drowned Girls Go, and there's a character in here who was from a really interesting world. And then for the Middle Game series, I desperately want this to be the 5-book series that Shannon intends it to be, and I really hope that that gets to happen for her, because naturally series as they go on lose readership and momentum, and she is so good at wrapping up a story in a way that you can be satisfied by this. But Seasonal Fears, I think, is gonna be just so good, and that is the Earth book. This is the Fire book, so I hope that we get a water, air, and ether book. You're gonna see me just really pushing everyone to pick up Seasonal Fears, even if I for some reason don't end up liking it, because I need the 3rd book, Tidal Creatures, so badly, because it's like the water moon based story. I need it. The other author that without a doubt I would include on my favorites list, both statistically and emotionally, is A.S. King. And it's funny because I've only given out 5 stars 3 times. Like, she has only just hit that rule. I crawl through it and dig, and everybody sees the ants were all 5 stars. But then she's gotten a good mix of 4 stars, 3 stars, and 2 stars from me. And I don't know what I really see in the future for A.S. King, because I don't think of her as somebody who would write adult. Not that she can't, not that she shouldn't. I just don't envision that. If I'm thinking like 10 years down the line, what would A.S. King be writing? She's been writing what she's been writing so well, and it's all kind of such a similar vibe that it's hard to imagine something else. But I do think middle grade, we will see more from her. And I'm actually more likely to pick up middle grade from her than young adult moving forward, because I think I've already successfully gotten these like weird, intense, like beautiful feelings from these books that I don't really need this anymore. And it's been proven to me because the last couple of books I read from her also had that weird vibe. They were also intense. They had so many good topics covered, but they didn't have the emotional impact that I'm used to. So one thing that I know she's coming out with is a book, I think it's about censorship, just by looking at the title and cover. It's called Attack of the Black Rectangles, and we are following a character in 6th grade, and I just feel like this is the right space for her. She has a lot of good things to say, and introducing certain things to this age audience I think is great, and I will continue to read these like along with Liam. Moving on, the book that I dropped, we've got Gillian Flynn. I didn't love Sharp Objects, but Gone Girl, Dark Places, and her short one, The Grown Up, were all 5 stars for me. And it's just wild to think that this was 10 years ago. We haven't gotten a novel from her in 10 years. The thing that I want from Gillian Flynn is the book that she has been writing, and it's the Hogarth Shakespeare book that is part of this series, that's based on Hamlet. That's one of my favorite stories from Shakespeare, and I think handling the themes of like betrayal and murder and revenge is safe in her hands, and I think it's going to be incredible. And I do appreciate the authors that come out with a book every year and what that takes, but the ones that take years and years and years to come out with something new, like, it just feels like it's going to be worth the wait. I think my math might have been wrong with 10, because this feels like more than 10, but my next one is a Kweke Emezi, which I feel like technically I shouldn't consider here because some of these were 4.5 stars, but I'm still considering them a favorite. And the thing about this author is there are so many books and so many different genres that it's another, like, I can't imagine what on earth they would write in the future, because there's so much backlist and other things that I still need to check out. And so that's what's exciting to me, is discovering an author and knowing that there's other things that I have to read. This like non-fiction-y one is at the top of my list. Oh, and then they even have a romance coming out. If there is an adult romance that I pick up in 2022, it's gonna be this one. So I just feel like I need to get through these faster. Next is like the opposite feeling for me. These ones are like almost 5 stars, but I'm like, this has to be a favorite author because I think of them as such an impactful experience. But then I look at Colleen Hoover and I'm like, yeah, these were 5 stars, but like Colleen Hoover is not a favorite author. And I think just because the nature of so many of her books are more lighthearted and fun, and even like I take issue with a lot of things. So then when I read ones that are so good and I know are impactful, there's just this confusing thing that my brain does where it's like, no, she's not like the author. And Colleen Hoover definitely is not an auto buy for me at this point. And it's so tough for me because I hate having to read like 4 books from an author before I find a good one. But finding adult romance that I enjoy is hard, and since I have found some, like, I want to keep picking up her stuff, but it's hard to get myself to do it. And some of the ones that I've loved, like, I don't consider romance, but it's a complicated relationship we have. Next up, let's cover Anna Marie Mclemore. These are my 5 stars from them. I don't even know where my other ones are. Just kidding, I found them. Some recent ones have been flops for me, which worries me about picking up Anna Marie Mclemore in the future. But when they're good, they're so good. I love the mix of reality and fantasy, and it's interesting because I'm not particularly intrigued by retellings, but when they do retellings, they're just so wonderfully done. So when I think about what I hope AM writes in the future, my mind goes to other retellings that I think they would be so good at. There's this one coming out this year that I'm obviously interested in. Takes place in the water, mermaid, selkie, something vibes. And it seems like it might be the most magical of everything I've read from them. But what I'd be so interested in for a retelling is something to do with like King Midas and the idea of this golden touch. Because what I think they write so well is romantic angst. This feeling of like, we can't be together because of this, or we shouldn't be together because of this. So I think that would be a really interesting thing, because there's a lot of physical like touch type magic in their books that one seems like it would be an interesting one to see. But I also think Rapunzel or Sleeping Beauty would be so good, because they don't feel like really overt retellings. They're just like vague in general. Like, we've got Swan Lake, Romeo and Juliet, The Red Shoes, and Snow White, and the Snow Queen vibes, but not what I would consider super close retellings. So that's what I'd be interested in. Also, like, I am in need of an adult novel, and I think that that's a realistic projection of this career, like an epic magical realism adult romance. That's what I need, and I think I could have it one day. Okay, I think last on my technical list of 10, and then I have some other like bonus ones that I have 2 from, is Case and Calendar. So we've got King of the Dragonflies, Felix Ever After, and then Hurricane Child. Those 2 are middle grades, and I again think that I will continue to pick up middle grade from Case and Calendar, because this gave me just everything that I needed from a YA book. I love how just like messy this whole experience is, and how we got a character who's just so dynamic and always changing and not necessarily likable all the time. Representation is obviously so important, and I think we'll see them continue to write in this age range and covering so many different like topics and thoughts on identity. But he also has quite a few other books that I'm not particularly interested in. I'm interested to see more like slightly magical middle grade. Okay, now I'm going to run through authors really quickly who have almost hit that 3 5-star ratings and what I want them to write, or what they're coming out with next. First up is Samantha Downing, who like was 4.5 stars for all of them, so like almost is on the list. But I do consider Samantha Downing a favorite thriller author just because I don't have that many of them. And I love that we got like a domestic husband-wife situation, but then we got out of that and read about just like sibling dynamics, school, co-worker dynamics. And I think she's so good at writing different perspectives and a whole cast of characters. What I want is a more distinct setting and atmosphere, and I want that to play a part in the story. So I would love to see something from Samantha Downing that is set like on an isolated island, or on like a cruise ship, because we're also often following like privileged, rich, like unlikable characters. And I think if you introduce some like vacation vibes, there could be a lot of fun scenarios. Next up is Kay Ingram. These were 5 stars and incredible. What I want from Kay Ingram is an adult book, and I want it to be like apocalyptic, because these have such a weird vibe to them. They're like soft sci-fi. They feel kind of futuristic, but I want her to do something one day that is like survival, apocalypse, and then we have that found family that she does so well. Jandy Nelson writes teenage, like intense romance so well, and I think this is just the right place for her. And so whatever Fall Boys and Disney in Paradise turns out to be, this is a cover that I created that I think it's gonna look like. I think it's gonna be perfect, and I can't even fathom what she would do after that because it's been like 10 years. Mona Awad, I really thought that All's Well was going to be that book that made her an all-time favorite author. Since she wrote one of my favorite books of all time, I still, like, in my heart of hearts, the emotional part of my brain wants to consider her a favorite, but I need another 5-star from her so badly just to solidify that for me. I don't think she has anything announced, but what she does so well is write about women and women's relationships with themselves, with each other, expectations on women in society. So I feel like we could get something from her that is about motherhood someday, kind of like a Night Bitch vibe. I'm really interested in another like friendship kind of dynamic, and I just hope that her horror continues to get more horror-y. I don't know what I would want the storyline to specifically be, because like she already wrote what should have been my favorite thing, which is a Shakespeare book. So whatever she writes, you know I'm gonna pick it up. She is an auto buy for me. Next up, let's talk Riley Sager. We've got Lock Every Door and Home Before Dark, which were 5 stars. And then I had a couple 3 stars from him, a couple 2 stars. I really do feel like The House Across the Lake is going to define for me if this is an author I want to continue to pick up, or if like we had the winners and we need to move on, because this just sounds like right up my alley, the kind of like marriage that you're watching from across the lake that you think is perfect and then you find out otherwise. Next up, we've got Tiffany D. Jackson. Grown and Monday's Not Coming were without a doubt 5 stars and some of the best YA I've ever read, YA thrillers I've ever read, absolutely. She got a little bit into horror with White Smoke and I didn't love it. And I just need Tiffany D. Jackson to go full out horror. Like I'm talking intense, gore, graphic. Still in YA, I don't know if I foresee her in adult. If she did write it, I would pick it up. But I think we need her in YA because we don't see this type of stuff a lot. But this, I think, could be it. It's like a Carrie retelling, and I think it could go there, and I'm desperate for it. Okay, I shouldn't change my battery because clearly I'm talking too much. Next up, we've got Nevo, and this is the case where these are absolutely 5 stars, but they're from the same series. So even if this 3rd book, which I can't wait to read, I think it's going to be incredible. This series I think is going to span so many books and I'm just going to read it forever. But I don't know if I'll really be able to consider her an all-time favorite author until I read something outside of this series. But these other things aren't what I'm particularly interested in. But outside of this series, I don't know too much about her writing or what she's interested in writing beyond like wealth and fame. So I can't imagine what she would write, but I want to pick up something else. And so I hope in the coming years something intrigues me, and it'll be another similar like Shannon Mcguire situation where like the series is so good and then there's this standalone that's just life-changing. I feel that for me and Nevo for some reason. Okay, next up I have a random one. That's Angie Weir. I'm just so interested to see what Angie Weir does next. This is not an author that, even though these books were great, that I think of as like, I need to read another book, because these are so similar that like I don't want him to write another book just like this, but I feel like he will, because when he went outside of this, that book didn't do great, and then he came back with this, which is such a similar vibe to this that people ate it up, including myself. But it's like, this feels like such the perfect thing for Angie Weir to be writing that I can't picture him writing something else. So for all of these authors that I'm talking about, or feel free to talk about your own favorite authors and what you want them to write, if you've ever thought about it, like what would your perfect author write if you could choose? What do you guys think Angie Weir is gonna do next? Because I think he needs to do something not in space, but maybe still space related. Like maybe we could follow somebody preparing for a space mission, or we could have something set in space but the core of it is the people like at at NASA on Earth trying to help the people in space. I don't know. Next, I've got a Diva Jaguar. And this excites me so much because these two books were so good, but I don't want to read this story again. I've been thinking about her a lot recently because the Henna Wars is so good. This representation is so needed. I thought it was so wonderful. And then I didn't expect this to like hit the same, but it totally did. And I was ready to be like, okay, a Diva Jaguar is going to come up with like a third one that's a similar story of two girls falling in love, like younger YA, but maybe a couple years down the line I'll pick up something else. And then this cover appeared and I just can't believe I get to read something like this from an author whose writing I already enjoy, because this is a book that I would probably pick up regardless of who was writing it. So it's just such a treat that I get to read it from a favorite. And this is like a high stakes heist story on the Titanic, and there's also sapphic relationships in it. Next is a tough one for me, but I have to include it because Peter Swanson, again, like one of the only thriller authors that I've loved more than like one book from, just because thrillers are more often like 3 stars for me consistently over and over again. But the thing about Peter Swanson is he writes some of my favorite thrillers and some of my least favorite thrillers. So I feel like this is an author that I will never stop reading, but I don't know that I could ever consider an all-time favorite. But perhaps with this one, it'll be the winner, because I love The Kind Worth Killing. I loved 8 Perfect Murders. And this one, which weirdly sounds like it should be a sequel, I feel like that might confuse people. 9 Lives sounds like it has just enough gimmick for me, with like a list of people and they're dying one by one. It's so complicated for me because I've given 2 5 stars, 2 2 stars, and I've DNF'd 2. But I keep picking them up, and I'm sure I still will until like I have other thriller authors who've proven themselves to be a success. Then I have Celeste Ng, who has a 3rd book ready to go for 2022 or 2023. These were both 5 stars, and the way that she writes family dynamics is my favorite thing. This one's called Our Missing Hearts, and it again seems to be kind of about banned books, or at least has a theme of that. It involves a character whose mother is a Chinese American poet, and because of that, in this story, her writing gets like removed from libraries because the way that she writes isn't seen as being patriotic enough. So we're following her child. They are not in each other's lives, and I can't tell if we're in like different timelines, but I think there will be a lot of like good conversations that come up like I found with her other things, and I think this could be it. This could be the thing to solidify Celeste Ng as an all-time favorite, and I'm really excited to consider Celeste Ng an all-time favorite because, like, again, emotionally I do, but statistically I just need that one more book. Then I've got Katrina Leno, who I couldn't find the highly rated ones that I have for some reason. One was sitting right here and now it's missing in my pile of books. But Summer of Salt and You Must Not Miss I consider 2 of like my favorite YA books that have like a magical element that I like. And right now she seems to be writing some like younger YA, which is great. One of them is Sometime in Summer, and I will be picking it up. Katrina Leno is an auto buy for me regardless of what she's writing, just because I want to keep up with what she's up to. But I need her to write adult, and I think that that is like a reasonable trajectory. She's not afraid to get a little bit gritty in her YA books, and I just think her writing this weird like Mona Awad style of real life and weirdness like in adults, I think it could be my favorite thing. Her writing is very mature, it's very beautiful, and I love it for what it is, and I think she's doing great things in the age range, but I need something adult from Katrina Leno. And then quickly, I have 4 books that I've only read from this author once, but I just could see myself considering this a favorite author in the future, depending on what they come out with. So a favorite author that I want to call a favorite author, but I can't because I've only read one book, is We Ride Upon Sticks by Quan Berry. Like, I desperately love this book, but her other books I'm just not really interested in. And they don't seem to have this weird, like, magical element, which is what I love so much. So I don't know if she's planning on publishing a bunch more or what it's gonna be, or if I'm ever gonna pick up anything else, but I want something like this again. Then I have The Night Swim by Megan Golden. Megan Golden just feels like a thriller author that I can trust, and I think when I read more from her eventually, I could really love it. I don't know what I would want from her, and actually I haven't even read Escape Room. Maybe I need to read Escape Room. Another one is Alyssa Cole. I know that she writes romance, and everyone loves her romance. I don't see myself picking those up. I don't know. Part of me feels like one day I will be a romance girly, but I'm not committing myself to that fate. Alyssa Cole I need more thrillers from. And like maybe this was a one-time thing because it's a story she really wanted to tell, and I totally respect that. But I think I could really love more thrillers from her. And the last one is Alexis Henderson. We were originally going to get a sequel for The Year of the Witching, which I was getting like worried about, but apparently we're not now. But she's working on something called House of Hunger, which says it's a gothic novel and it's about like wealth and countesses. And we're following a character who's a blood maid, and I need to have it. So those are just some authors that I want to consider favorites because they've written some favorite things, but I hope that as I follow their career and read more from them that they can solidify themselves in that. And those are the ones that if I look at my shelf and I see authors that I've only read one book from, these feel like they have the potential to get there. Meanwhile, some of my other all-time favorite books, like these are not authors I would consider favorite authors because other things I've read from them I hated, and I've only had one really good experience with them. So that's my video. I think it was long. Thanks for answering all of my questions. If you have answers to my questions down below. I don't know what the point of this video was, but I'm glad to have filmed it and just to talk through some of my thoughts on favorite authors and things that I hope to read in the future. And I'll see you later. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. Bye.